There are men who can no longer hear their own minds, not because it's silent, but because it talks too much, all the time, in every direction. It's as if each thought is a person shouting inside a narrow corridor, fighting for space, interrupting each other, trampling the next. The man tries to think, but he can't. He tries to decide, but gets lost. He tries to rest, but sinks even further into his own noise. It's a kind of invisible exhaustion, and no one around notices how much it weighs. A noisy mind is a mind that suffers, and this modern noise is cruel. It doesn't just come from notifications, screens, conversations, and obligations. It comes from expectations, comparisons, doubts, postponed decisions, accumulated worries, and especially the habit of trying to think about everything at the same time. The man tries to solve problems before they even exist. He tries to predict scenarios that will never happen. He tries to carry the entire future on his back while still dealing with the past. And the result is a brain that doesn't rest, doesn't focus, and doesn't see. Marcus Aurelius said, "He who is master of himself sees everything in proportion." And proportion is precisely what is missing when the mind is clouded, because when there is too much noise, everything seems urgent, everything seems big, everything seems like a problem. And the truth is simple. There is no clarity while the mind is trying to survive the internal chaos. Maybe you're here because you feel this. You try to do one thing and think of 10. You try to work and think about family problems. You try to rest and remember what you haven't done. You try to focus and open 5 new tabs. You try to silence it and the noise increases. Maybe you realize that you have lost the ability to think deeply because confusion occupies every space that should be yours. And this is where clarity begins, when you recognize that you can no longer hear your own voice. In this video, I'm going to show you the 6 levels of male mental clarity, the journey that transforms a man who lives confused, anxious, and scattered into someone capable of seeing the essential with simplicity and precision. You will understand how your mind goes from noise to silence, from dispersion to focus, from confusion to deep vision. And if you stay with me until the end, you will discover how to apply this in practice, how to cleanse your mind in a real way, not with pretty phrases, but with discipline, presence, and internal direction. Before we continue, do something simple. Subscribe to the channel if you really want to build a more lucid, disciplined, and powerful mind. And in the comments, write your city and your age. This helps me understand who is walking with me in the search for mental maturity. Now breathe. Just breathe. Clarity begins exactly like this, with the first space between one thought and another. Level 1. The clouded mind. The clouded mind is the starting point of all confusions. It is when the man tries to think about everything and therefore doesn't think about anything. He wakes up already with the feeling of being late, as if he had lost something during the night. The head awakens full of images, worries, loose ideas, disconnected thoughts. Nothing is organized. Nothing is categorized. Nothing is in its place. It's like a table full of mixed papers, where the important gets lost in the middle of the urgent, and the urgent gets lost in the middle of the useless. This is the state of the man who lives reacting to the world. He opens his cell phone before fully opening his eyes. He responds to messages while trying to remember the day's commitments. He starts a task and already thinks about the next. He tries to concentrate, but the mind spreads. He tries to focus, but the thought flees. He tries to reason, but anxiety suffocates. Everything in him works like a crowd, wanting to pass through the same narrow door. And the most dangerous thing about this level is that the man believes he is thinking a lot, but in reality, he is just thinking too much and badly. Excessive thinking is not a sign of intelligence. It is a sign of lack of direction. A mind that is too full is not a deep mind. It is a lost mind. Imagine the man who tries to work but opens 10 different tabs. While reading something, he remembers something else. While writing, he thinks about an emotional problem. While trying to decide, fear paralyzes him. He is never fully present anywhere because his energy is always dividing into parts that are too small to make a difference. The clouded mind creates fatigue, irritation, indecision, and even silent emotional crises. It steals presence, it steals productivity, it steals peace. And the worst, it steals identity, because the man who cannot hear his own mind stops knowing what he really wants. The clouded mind is the enemy of clarity, but it is also the beginning of liberation. Because when the man realizes that he is buried by his own noise, he finally understands that he needs to create internal space. And here, the first movement of clarity is born, recognizing that there is too much noise and that thinking a lot is not thinking well. This recognition opens the door to the next level, the level in which chaos begins to be dismantled, one gesture at a time. Level 2. The first silence. Clarity doesn't arrive like a lightning bolt. It doesn't appear suddenly. It arises as a small space between thoughts, a tiny interval, almost imperceptible. And this interval is the first silence. The first silence is not the absence of external noise. It is the absence of internal excess. It is the moment when the man realizes that he doesn't need to keep up with the frantic pace that his mind imposes. It is when, for the first time, he gives himself the right to breathe without needing to decide anything at that exact second. Here, something begins to change. The man realizes that chaos is not resolved by thinking more. It is resolved by thinking better. The mind begins to understand that it cannot carry everything at the same time. It needs to prioritize. It needs to order. It needs to refuse. It needs to cut. It needs to restructure. And it is here that the first practical movements arise, almost always intuitively. He cleans the table, tidies up the environment, throws away what he doesn't use, organizes the tasks, reduces the list of priorities, defines what is really important. And this seems too simple, but it is not. Because when the external environment is organized, the brain begins to understand that it doesn't need to panic. It finally finds space. It finds soil. It finds ground. A tidy room is a message to the brain. You are safe here. A clean table is another message. Now it is possible to focus. A basic routine, even minimal, tells the body, we are not lost. Physical order is the lever of emotional order. And the Stoics knew this very well. Marcus Aurelius spoke about simplifying, Seneca spoke about reducing, and Epictetus spoke about choosing what really matters. The first silence is this, the awareness that you don't need to carry everything, that you can rest, that you can organize, that you can be less to think more. And when this perception enters, the mind obeys. It begins to slow down, it breathes differently, it thinks more precisely. The first silence is the clearing of the land. It is what prepares the man for the next level, that of directed energy. Level 3, the directed mind. If the first silence clears the land, the directed mind plants the seed. Here the man discovers something that no one taught him. Thinking is not accumulating, it is choosing. What destroys the man is not the volume of thoughts, it is the lack of direction of them. The directed mind is the stage in which the man realizes that, to have clarity, he needs to be fully present in one thing at a time. It is here that he understands that focus is not talent. It is cutting. It is saying no to everything that steals presence. And when this understanding enters, the man changes his way of acting. He starts doing one thing at a time. He closes the open tabs. He finishes what he started. He organizes the schedules. He blocks distractions. He returns to the mind what it lost in the confusion, intention. Imagine a man writing something important. At the level of the clouded mind, he looks at his cell phone, opens another window, responds to someone, returns, loses the line of reasoning, tries to resume, and never deepens. But when the mind is directed, the world around disappears. There is only him, the gesture, and the moment. The quality of what he does increases. Anxiety decreases. Mental fatigue disappears. The feeling of being late dissolves. The man begins to feel something rare these days: total presence. And total presence is power. Power to decide, power to see, power to act. The Stoics had a simple principle: do only what is before you, and do it completely. The directed mind is this: the art of not being distracted from yourself. At this level, the man ceases to be a victim of his own thought. He begins to guide the mind as one guides a restless horse, with firmness and precision. And when the mind learns to walk in a straight line, something extraordinary begins to emerge: depth. And depth is the next level, level 4. The deep mind. Real clarity is not born in superficial focus. Until now, the man has learned to reduce noise, organize the environment, and direct energy. But the true transformation begins when he realizes that thinking is not just looking, it is crossing. The deep mind is the level in which the man learns to go beyond the first layer. He stops accepting shallow answers, stops being a slave to haste, stops being satisfied with quick conclusions. He discovers that depth is not in thinking more, but in staying longer with the right thought. It is here that the man learns to sit with his own discomfort. He no longer runs away from the emotion that appears. He doesn't try to avoid the truth. He doesn't try to distract himself when something hurts. He looks, he observes, he asks, he investigates. Depth requires courage, because looking inward without filters is facing what the mind has avoided for years. It is looking at old wounds. It is observing destructive patterns. It is recognizing repeated thoughts that have never been questioned. It is accepting that emotional confusion often arises from poorly told stories within ourselves. Imagine someone going through a conflict with another person. At the shallow level, he just reacts, "I'm angry." In the deep mind, he asks, "Why did this hurt me? What part of me does this touch? What does this reaction reveal about me? Is the pain from now, or is it old? What does this tell me about my expectations?" It is here that the man stops blaming the world and begins to understand his own emotional architecture. Deep thinking reorganizes wounds. It creates discernment. It creates maturity. It creates such a clear understanding of one's own mind that emotions cease to dominate. The Stoics said that the wise man does not react to the symptom. He seeks the cause. And that is exactly what happens at this level. Confusion dissolves when the root is found. The man finally stops being dragged by impulses. He begins to control his own internal narrative. He sees what was previously hidden, and seeing is always the beginning of liberation. Level 5. The mind that sees patterns. This is the level of silent lucidity. Here the man stops seeing only isolated facts. He begins to see patterns. He connects points that previously seemed loose. He understands repetitions that previously confused him. He perceives invisible connections, subtle intentions, recurring behaviors. The mind that sees patterns is the mind that understands reality in layers. It is when the man realizes that almost nothing happens out of nowhere. There are reasons. There are habits, there are tendencies, there are unconscious choices. There are stories that echo in our way of acting, and with that, he begins to see meaning even in what seemed chaotic. Imagine a man who always gets irritated with the same things. At first, he thinks it's bad luck. At the second level, he realizes that he is overloaded. In depth, he understands that the irritation reveals a limit that he never established. And now, seeing patterns, he finally understands what needs to be adjusted. Imagine another man who always falls into the same types of relationship Before he believed it was destiny. Now he realizes that it is an emotional pattern. He attracts what he hasn't resolved yet. And he only realizes this when he stops living in automatic mode. The mind that sees patterns also understands the outside world more clearly. It understands people, behaviors, social movements, collective decisions. It is not easily manipulated because it sees the intention behind the gesture. It is not easily deceived because it perceives the root behind the word. It is not easily shaken because it sees logic even where others see chaos. And it is here that insights are born. Those moments of sudden clarity that seem like illumination. But they are not magical. They are the result of silence, focus, depth, and observation. Insight is the prize of calm. And when the man begins to see patterns, something even more powerful arises within him. The ability to understand life without haste, without despair, and without confusion. This level prepares the ground for the last one, where vision ceases to be understanding and transforms into applied wisdom. Level 6, the illuminated mind. This is the pinnacle of clarity. It is not a mystical state nor a kind of mental superpower. It is just the natural result of a man who has traveled all the previous levels with honesty, discipline, and inner courage. The illuminated mind is the mind that finally understands the flow of life. The man stops reacting like someone who is constantly being pushed by reality and starts acting like someone who reads reality. He sees cause, time, and consequence in a calm, aligned, almost mathematical way. Here, the man does not create internal storms. He does not amplify problems. He does not dramatize what does not need to be dramatized. He does not interpret everything as a threat, rejection, or urgency. He realizes that most conflicts are just noises of the moment, not permanent truths. The illuminated mind sees further, but more importantly than that, it sees deeper. When something happens, the man does not ask, "Why is this happening to me?" but "What does this mean within the context of my life?" He understands that each gesture, each person, each obstacle, each loss, each delay, and each unexpected path is part of a larger network, a structure of experience that shapes him in ways that he only perceives when he looks with this new lens. The illuminated mind does not predict the future. It understands the future because it recognizes patterns, rhythms, signs, and natural consequences of choices. And this understanding creates serenity. Imagine a man going through an unforeseen event that would have destroyed his calm in previous levels. Here, he just adjusts the route. He doesn't despair because he knows that despair doesn't solve anything. He doesn't complain because he understands that complaining doesn't change the fact. He doesn't freeze because he knows that life goes on and that he continues with it. The illuminated mind is light, not because life has become easy, but because the man has become whole. He finally sees with clarity what was previously pure confusion. He sees life as it is, and therefore stops suffering for what it is not. The world only seems chaotic to those who still see with dust in their eyes. When the dust falls, the vision appears. And this vision is what sustains the last gesture of this journey, living with lucidity. Now look at everything we've covered. Look calmly, because this is the first proof of your new clarity. You left the clouded mind, where everything was noise, where everything was urgent, where you tried to carry the world and ended up crushed by it. You went through the first silence, where your mind began to breathe. You arrived at the directed mind, where you learned that focus is cutting, not effort. You crossed the deep mind, where you had the courage to look inward instead of running away from yourself. You entered the mind that sees patterns, where everything began to make sense. And you reached the illuminated mind, where vision replaces confusion and serenity replaces anxiety. This journey doesn't just transform the way you think, it transforms the way you exist. because the man who thinks with clarity acts with clarity, and the man who acts with clarity lives with power. Clarity is not thinking more, it is thinking better, it is seeing more with less effort, it is seeing the world without illusions, it is hearing your own mind without noise. It is stopping carrying what is not yours, it is knowing what really matters and discarding the rest. Seneca said, "For the man who knows his own path, no road is confusing." And that is what I wish for you, a mind that does not stumble on its own noise. If this video helped you, subscribe to the channel. Here we build lucidity, strength, and direction for men who want to live with consistency, not with improvisation. And in the comments, write vision, not as a pretty word, but as a symbol of what you are cultivating within yourself from today.